Greetings, everybody. Welcome again to another episode of Ridge Talk. As always, I'm Justin. With me here in the studio is Sean and Daniel. Please feel free to like and subscribe the episode just so that you get a email notification every time a new episode drops. And there's not really a whole lot going on here today, but there's tons of stuff going on behind the scenes.
That's right.
We haven't gotten any new questions or anything, so that's just a reminder to you all. Please feel free to send in any questions you may have about the church or about the scriptures that we can talk about in a future episode. This week is church camp. The middle school camp is going on down in Doddridge County, and I know that Daniel had an opportunity to be down there yesterday. So what was that like?
It was awesome. It was great. So yeah, we had church on Sunday, and then I went up and got to speak Sunday kind of evening, and then usually we do a fireside chat. But right in the middle of me speaking, before we went out to the fire pit, this crazy storm came through, and the power went out. Generators had to come on, and all our firewood got wet. So instead, we met indoors, but we put these little lanterns in the middle that kind of looked like a fire, and I would just walk around those in the dark, and it was kind of funny. And then I stayed yesterday too, and man, it was just awesome. There's 50 middle school students down there, and fully engaged in worship and in listening to the gospel and encountering the word, and it was just life-giving for me to be able to worship with them and just to see all the things that are going on down there. So
you might not know the answer, but I'm guessing if there were 50 middle school students there, I don't think we have 50 middle school students here.
19, I know, of the 50, 19 of those students are not connected here. They were guests of people from here who wanted to go. So that's about, what is 50%. That? That's a big, what is that?
That's almost 50%, right?
Yeah, it's like 40%. Yeah, it's a good number.
Yeah, so that's awesome.
Yeah,
very cool.
It's very, very cool.
Not much happening in my world. Outside of church and ministry, last week, my lovely wife and I had an opportunity to take a cycling trip from Cumberland to Pittsburgh on what we call the Gap. It's the Great Allegheny Passage. So just having 3 days of bike packing, cycling all day and sleeping in a tent at night. Just a good time to get away, just catch up a bit. Of course, we did pick the week that was over 100 degrees in heat index weather. But, that was completely outside of our control.
Yeah, what are you going to do about it?
Our daughter was at, a church camp with some of her friends last week. And we're like, okay, the dates are picked. She's got care taken care of. So we just need somebody to watch the dog, and we can get away. We did. We got away, and that was a really good trip. Just to be able to spend that kind of time, with my lovely wife.
That's awesome.
Over 3 days, and I know that with the mission trip to Nicaragua, that's one of the things that Sean really just appreciated and loves about his experience going to Nicaragua was that his wife was able to join in with that as well.
Yeah.
So just share a little bit more about that.
Oh, man. I'll try to do it without crying like in the first 30 seconds of you throwing this to me. That's not going to happen, so I just let it happen. Yeah, I got a front row seat in just watching God in his kindness and his love really do some deep restorative things, both in myself and in my wife. And honestly, every person that went with us, and that's not hyperbole. I mean, I know sometimes we go on these trips and, we kind of want to overhype what happens. What I loved about this trip is that it wasn't hype at all, but it was depth. And I really got to watch God work in some deep ways in each member of the trip. I've never, this was probably my 15th or 16th short-term missions trip.
Yeah.
I've never seen team unity like I saw. Wow. I've not seen just like Seth and I talked about it a little bit usually when you are gone for that amount of time and you have that many people, at some point throughout the week, multiple people kind of hit the wall. And you'll experience sometimes those moments where it's just being human. You're tired, you're out of your normal environment, you're eating new food, your body's, reacting. And so what inevitably seems to happen is that, people can get a little short-tempered, or there might be some relational tension. There might be something that happens in the midst of those weeks. And man, we did not experience anything even remotely close to that. And just the friendship, the camaraderie, and the love that was shared between 11 people. It's tough to get 11 people together nearly 18 hours a day for a week and not have there be
friction or tension.
I mean, that's really difficult to do. And man, I just got to watch God's kindness filter through that group. That was the word that I kind of kept coming to mind and kind of kept seeing, was how kind God was being to each person. And so, that's inclusive of my wife and me. We got just some really cool things that happen. We'll tell, I don't want to tell her stories for her, but I got to watch God work in her life in some very specific ways. And then for me, really just watched the resurrection of a dream that had been dead for 10 years in me.
So talk about that. What is that resurrection of that dream that's kind of been dead?
So I'll tell the full story today, because I think it's okay to do that. I told this to our group while we were down there. And so 10 years ago, I was married to a different person. 10 years. So let me give some context here. We went a week ago today. We're filming this on Tuesday. So Tuesday of last week, we went to the Young Life camp in Nicaragua. And we spent 3 days and nights there before returning back. And so camp ministry was always a huge part of my life. I think 20 years straight, I went to a church camp in Ohio as a camper and then as a youth pastor, taking the kids in my youth group to the same camp I grew up at, same camp that my mom grew up going to, Heritage. And in 2010, I met my wife Chastity's brother at that same camp. The interesting twist of the story is that I also met my ex-wife that same year at that same camp. And we met because we got paired up to teach Spanish classes to students at that camp. And then, so, things unfolded 10 years ago. And while I was attending that camp as a youth pastor with kids, my wife was actively having an affair during that week that in my house. And so my last camp experiences kind of had a shadow hanging over them because it was like, it's where I met her. It's where some pretty hard things, kind of took place while I was there. And I left that position never really feeling like I ever got to redeem my time at camp. And this thing that was such a huge part of my life and something that I held so incredibly dear. In fact, I kind of forgot until this past week how dearly I held camp ministry. And I think because of the trauma and things that I sort of associated with that, that I had kind of just put that behind me. And so I'm sitting, we had a worship time at the Young Life camp in Nicaragua. And man, I do this for a living. I sing worship songs, and I have not experienced a move of the Spirit in such a powerful but also tender way as I did just singing a couple songs in this game room at the camp in Nicaragua. And all of these things just started flooding back into my mind. And I started putting some pieces together of what God was doing in that moment. And this is kind of where this story comes from. And I realized that, my time as someone who got to minister in a camp setting kind of abruptly came to an end with no real resolution to it. And not like an end that feels good when you look back on it.
Yeah.
Tied into that is I had kind of had a vision for my life. I wanted to plant a bilingual church somewhere in the eastern U.S. And so what I had envisioned for my life 10 years ago was that I would be ministering at camps with my wife in Spanish and English. And unfortunately, that marriage came to an end. I went on my last trip to Cuba at the end of that year. So 2014 for me really was a year where it seemed like all of those things. That was my last year going to camp. It was my last year using Spanish in ministry. And so from 2014 to 2024, those things have been behind me. And I got to sit in a camp this past week and look over across the room and see my wife and realize that this dream of ministering at camp in Spanish with my wife was a reality that I was living in that moment. And I don't yet have words for that other than to say that when God puts a dream on your heart, that he can resurrect that at any moment. And what's funny is to look back at the same week, in the same days that, I met my ex-wife and all of that took place. I also met Chastity's brother, who was how I met Chas. So in the complexity of God's sovereignty and all of that, I don't want to put too much there, but I just go like, man, it just really seems like, God and his foreknowledge just was there ready to go, hey, the dreams that are on your heart, can be fulfilled. I never could have imagined, going through everything I went through and exactly how those dreams would be fulfilled. But man, I just am incredibly grateful for that. And yeah, so.
Sean, thank you for sharing that story. One of the books that Sean and I are reading together with some of the other leadership guys, just as you were talking, it reminded me, he points out that, so many of the big giants of the faith and the big, like, momentous historic moments that we see, we all look at that and think, well, that's where we should be day one in our Christian walk.
Yeah.
And he makes the point that, like, well, that's silly. What we don't see is the decades and decades of walking with the Lord that it took to get to that point. And just hearing your story, just thinking about, like, God put a dream on your heart and a decade went by before you saw it come to fruition. There's something about that, but there's also something about that faithful, steady, I'm going to keep following God, even when the dream that was in my heart, I thought it died, and so I just want to commend you for that. And also just your ability to reflect over that and see, like, oh, God has been at work all along. And I just had to be patient.
Yeah. there's more stories that we're going to tell. We're actually going to do, I think, a Ridge Talk episode with as much of the team as we can get together.
I'm excited about that.
And also, I think, have an opportunity maybe to share some stories on a Sunday. So I don't want to tell too much more. There's another incredible thing that I walked away from. And all I will say at this moment is, when I was sitting in that worship time, everything that I just described, it was like this picture of all of those things, but just like in a moment.
Wow.
And I had I just believe that it was the Holy Spirit revealing that to me, because it was just so quickly I saw how everything fit together. I had another experience of seeing something like that, and I'm looking forward to telling that story.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear that.
But we'll leave that as a little bit of a cliffhanger, I think. But yeah, it just was such an incredible time. And the last thing maybe I want to say today is just this trip was centered around young life, and so we took a group of teenagers and a couple who are, I think, in their young 20s with us. Man, I'm just blown away by those guys, and seeing what is happening in their lives, and then seeing what is happening in the lives of the young people in Nicaragua. I'm so incredibly hopeful for this generation that is stepping into what God has for them. In today's world, I think it's very easy, and even in the church world, it's really easy to grow disappointed because statistics tell a story, but I don't know that statistics always tell the full story. And if we just look at statistics right now, with the amount of Gen Z that have either left the church or have never even been in the church,
right.
And then looking at the younger generations like Gen Alpha, who are not hardly churched at all, it's really easy to grow discouraged by that.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you that after spending a week with the young people in our church, and looking at what God is doing in the younger generation in Nicaragua, I'm filled with an incredible amount of hope, because the depth and the maturity and the urgency with which they are living for the gospel, I just am so ready to start giving them more and more opportunities, because I think we are just going to be blown away by what God does in these generations. Wow. Yeah.
It's incredible. I appreciate your steadfastness in knowing that you had that dream and continuing to pursue it over a 10-year period of time. And I appreciate, too, just your own acknowledgement of having some of those hard emotions coming at you, of just how powerful it was and tiring all at the same time.
Yeah.
And a lot of people get those, just over emotional feelings, and they're like, oh, that's bad. I need to just set those aside over here. And you're not doing that either. You're like, no, I'm going to process those in the presence of God to see everything that He's really revealing to me through this experience.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that, we all need to do on a more regular basis. With everything that Sean shared there and is going to continue to share in the future, we can put a plug out to say, hey, we're going to have more short-term mission trips in the future.
That's right.
And, what Sean is sharing here is evidence that the short-term mission trip isn't always about the people that you're ministering to when you go there. It's about the change that happens in your own life first.
Sure.
And everybody that I've ever known who's going on a short-term mission trip, and the trips that I've taken myself, they've been life-changing.
Yeah, they're transformative.
So continue or begin to pray about whether or not God would have you attend a short-term trip with us or with another organization in the future. Sean was joking with us before we hit the record button that everybody on this trip said, well, we don't know who you're going to get next year because we're all coming back. But that doesn't mean we can't have a bigger team.
That's right.
If anybody's, just begin now to prayerfully consider, is that a step that God might be inviting you to take? And on Sunday, I think you said July 14th.
Yeah, so the two follow-ups from this, one, we're definitely going to have a Ridge Talk episode with the team.
Yeah.
But the other is that July 14th, our goal is to have a missions focus week where really the main thrust of that entire day is that we're telling stories of both international and local missions and how people can get plugged into those.
Yeah, so that's not just going to be for this specific Nicaragua short-term mission trip. It's going to be other missions endeavors that we're currently involved in.
Yeah.
But that's going to be coming up on July 14th. So you can go ahead and save the date for that as well.
Yeah. I just want to say, I kind of get to be the guy with the front row seat of overseeing local missions and international missions at this point. And which really just means that I get to watch stories of transformation happening. And there's a lot of good happening both in our community and in our region and then outside of here. So as you said, I'm fighting the urge right now to want to say, let's pack the suitcase back up and head back out.
Yeah.
Right. Which is great. But I also, as I was praying this morning, I had that sense of like, oh man, I would give anything just to be back having some of the specific opportunities that we had. Like a week ago right now, we were sitting in school classrooms openly sharing the gospel with students.
Wow.
Because of some relationships that they've built there. And I found myself going, man, what I wouldn't give right now to be back in that environment with that amount of freedom, sharing the gospel. And again, very kindly and very quickly, the Holy Spirit reminded me, but you're here. And there are people here that need you to have that same level of boldness and same level of freedom to talk about Jesus here as you did there.
That's
and so just regardless of whether or not you end up being somebody who can say yes to an international trip or a regional trip or whatever the case may be, I think what our heart is currently burning for as pastors and staff is that all of us would say yes to the purpose of ministering to whatever context we find ourselves in, and that we would all really be missionaries in our own context, at work, at school, wherever we find ourselves, that our neighbors would really begin to matter to us in a greater way than maybe they have before. And so no matter if you're listening to this, whatever, as we tell these stories over the next several weeks about our international trips, about our local partners, all of those things, our hope would be that is inspirational. And it's great to have inspiration, but that would be something that would then help your mind start to develop. Where can you step out onto a missional area in your life
where you are right now?
Do those same things. Yeah.
Inspiration's good, but God's all about transformation.
Yeah.
And everything that you've shared so far, this trip was transformational for you and the rest of the team as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess there's a lot more information coming your way here in the future. Our middle school camp, we're going to have more to share on that. The specific Nicaragua mission trip, we're gonna have more. We're gonna have a specific episode on that in the future as well. And Sunday, July 14th, we're going to use our services that day just to talk about everything happening regarding missions.
Yep.
So yeah, lots more good stuff to come. But still, if you have a question or anything for us, please feel free to send that in. We'd welcome the opportunity to either answer it here on the show or just take an opportunity to meet with you one-on-one in person and talk it through. And again, feel free to like and subscribe. And we look forward to seeing you again next time.